Why was no one noticing the way her eyes moved? The parking lot outside Fairview Plaza smelled like cut grass and engine heat. School was out. Parents were off base. The late afternoon sun angled low across windshields and chain stores. Not the kind of place you'd expect anything sharp to happen. But if you looked closely, if you really watched, you'd see her scanning. Always scanning. Lieutenant Commander Sienna Maddox stepped out of the dry cleaners with a folded uniform bag over her shoulder and her son's hoodie clutched in her other hand. She wore civilian cargo pants, a faded navy blue t-shirt tucked at the waist, and mirrored sunglasses that did half the talking for her. To everyone else, she was just another mom running errands, just another woman in the endless shuffle of suburban afternoon routine. But there was something they didn't know. Something she hadn't needed to tell anyone. Not yet. Her son Theo skipped 2 steps ahead, a soccer ball tucked under his arm and grass stains still smudged across his shin. 10 years old, full of energy, completely unaware that his mother was tracking every movement in a 50-foot radius. She couldn't help it. It was muscle memory now, burned into her after years of convoy rides through hostile terrain, after missions where a single moment of distraction could cost lives. "You said we could get a smoothie after," he said without turning. "You say that like I forgot," Sienna replied, catching up with a half smile. "But you also said you wouldn't slide tackle during recess today." He turned, grinning. It wasn't a real slide, just a controlled deceleration. That's not a word a 10-year-old should use after falling on concrete. They crossed toward the Strip's corner smoothie shop, passing a line of parked cars and a couple of teenage skateboarders weaving in and out of cart returns. The kind of slow, drifting rhythm every base-adjacent suburb settled into between 4 o'clock and dinner hour. Nothing urgent, nothing dangerous. And yet without seeming to look, Sienna's eyes swept the area. Her pace adjusted a fraction as they moved between shadow and sun. She noted the skateboarders. Noticed the van with blackout tint still running near the end of the lot. Noticed the man arguing with someone on speakerphone 3 stores down. And just as quickly dismissed each one with the calm discipline of muscle memory. Theo didn't notice. He was mid-sentence about his school's science fair when he paused to adjust the laces on his sneaker. Sienna instinctively reached her arm out to guide him back toward her side. Nothing dramatic, just protective placement. Subtle, constant, like she was always tracking vectors, even in peacetime. The smoothie shop door was propped open with a painted rock. A chalkboard sign advertised a mango special with too many exclamation points. Inside, there were 3 families ahead of them. A girl in braces asked for oat milk. A father in uniform gave his toddler the last sip of strawberry banana. Normal, safe, routine. "Go grab a table by the window," Sienna said, brushing Theo's shoulder. He took off toward the corner booth. She stayed behind to order. As she waited in line, a voice caught her attention behind her. Sharp, dismissive, young. "Move it, lady." Sienna shifted to the side calmly, not responding, just enough to let 2 young men walk past. Early 20s. Baseball caps low, swagger and cheap cologne. They didn't look at her again, but one of them muttered something under his breath, followed by a short laugh. She didn't react, didn't even blink. But she did glance just once toward her son at the booth, still smiling, still safe. Sienna turned back toward the counter and waited, because this afternoon was supposed to be normal. But something in her gut had just shifted. And if there was one thing she'd learned in years of combat, it was the difference between noise and threat. And this wasn't noise. She felt it the way sailors feel a storm coming before the sky changes, the way snipers feel a shift in wind before the scope shows it. Something was wrong. She just didn't know what yet, but she would. Because people like Sienna Maddox didn't survive what she'd survived by ignoring instinct. They survived by listening to it. Even when everything looked calm, even when everyone else saw nothing, she saw something, and she was already preparing. What would you do if your child was standing alone, cornered, and you weren't there yet? Outside the smoothie shop, the sun had dropped just enough to sharpen shadows beneath the awnings and make everyone squint as they stepped out. Sienna held both drinks, one mango strawberry, one plain banana with oat milk. She was scanning the sidewalk when she saw him, Theo, standing by the corner of the plaza, back to the wall, clutching the soccer ball tighter than usual. Her heart didn't race. That wasn't how her body worked anymore. Instead, everything slowed, sharpened, her vision narrowed, her breathing steadied. She moved fast but not rushed. Training didn't let her do anything with panic. As she approached, she heard it. "Hey, tough guy," one of them was saying. "You think being a little mama's boy gets you out of saying excuse me?" Two young men stood between Theo and the rest of the sidewalk, both in their early 20s, baggy hoodies, mirrored sunglasses, sneakers too clean to have ever touched gravel, not in uniform, not local either judging by the accent, but full of something close to a dare. Sienna stepped forward, placed the smoothies on the concrete bench beside the planter box, and inserted herself between her son and the two men without saying a word. Theo didn't say anything either, but his eyes locked on hers. She didn't kneel, didn't hug him, just a hand placed lightly on his shoulder, anchoring him. The taller of the two men leaned his weight from one foot to the other, smirking. "We just said watch it, lady. Your kid nearly rolled into us like a stray." Sienna spoke calmly. "He's 10, you're 20, adjust your posture accordingly." The second man, wiry and shorter, laughed like it was a bar joke. "Ah, now she's giving orders." Sienna didn't move. "No, I'm giving you an out." They looked at each other, half smirking, then glanced at Theo, who still hadn't moved. "Kid looks scared," the tall one said. "He's not," she replied, "but he's about to learn what a bad decision looks like from 6 feet away." The shorter one stepped forward, not with purpose but with the swagger of someone used to bluffing. "Or what, you going to call your husband?" Sienna's voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. "He doesn't take these calls anymore," she said, "but I do." That made them pause, half a beat. But that was the danger with cowards who performed confidence. They often couldn't tell when the tide turned until it was pulling them under. The tall guy scoffed and turned to Theo. "Maybe next time you say sorry, kid." He reached forward, maybe to pat his head, maybe to tap the ball. That was the first time Theo flinched. Sienna stepped between the hand and her son so fast that the man barely registered it. "Back off," she said flatly. The shift was microscopic, only posture, her shoulders squared, her head tilted 5 degrees to the left. Her heels aligned beneath her like a platform, but it was enough for someone watching. An older man sitting near the bakery had been watching since the beginning. He wore a faded Marine Corps t-shirt. He put down his coffee, slowly, deliberately, because he recognized something. The two men didn't move yet. They were still playing, still testing. Theo looked up. "Mom." Sienna didn't look down, didn't break eye contact. "Stand behind me," she said, not loud, not angry, just final. And in that moment the balance of the street changed. The crowd didn't know why, but the men were about to find out. Because what they thought was a quiet mom in a t-shirt was something else entirely. Something they hadn't prepared for. Something that didn't need to announce itself. It just was. And now they were standing too close to it. Do you know what happens when someone who's never been tested meets someone who's been forged in fire? The plaza had gone quiet in the way public places do when something tense begins to take shape, but no one knows how it will end. A stroller wheel squeaked somewhere behind the smoothie shop. A shopping cart clanged against a curb. Even the skateboarders had stopped, boards tipped on their sides, eyes half fixed on the slow-moving confrontation. The taller man shifted his weight, amused now, emboldened by the attention gathering at the edges of the sidewalk. He angled his chin downward, looking at Sienna the way men do when they think size and volume are the same as power. "You really want to do this in front of your kid?" She didn't answer. Didn't need to, because she wasn't the one doing anything. Not yet. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the energy drink on his breath. Close enough that Theo, still behind her, took a half step back, and that's when it happened. The man raised his hand, not to hit, not exactly, just to push, to intimidate, to make her move. But Sienna Maddox didn't move for anyone. The slap came fast, open palm across her cheek. The crack echoed across the plaza like a gunshot. The crowd gasped. Theo cried out, clutched her side, and Sienna, she didn't even flinch. Her head turned slightly from the impact. Then slowly, deliberately, she turned it back. Her sunglasses were still on. Her expression hadn't changed. She didn't touch her face, didn't rub the sting away. She just looked at him, and in that look he saw something he hadn't expected. Not fear, not shock, not even anger, just cold, surgical assessment, like she was deciding how much damage to do and how little effort it would take. The shorter man laughed nervously. "Yo," she didn't even move. The taller one hesitated, just for a second. But that second was everything. Sienna spoke, 2 words to her son, stand behind me. Theo moved without question, without hesitation, because he trusted her, even though he'd never seen this side of her. Even though his hands were shaking and his heart was pounding, he trusted her. The man who'd slapped her tried to recover, tried to laugh it off. See, she's all talk. He reached for her again, this time to shove, this time with both hands. And that's when Sienna moved. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy, it was surgical. Her left hand intercepted his wrist mid-reach. Her right hand secured his elbow, and in one fluid motion she rotated his arm inward, stepped through his center line, and dropped her weight. He went down, hard, face first into the concrete. The impact was brutal, final, the kind of sound that makes everyone wince. He gasped, tried to push himself up. But Sienna's knee was already on his spine, her hand still controlling his wrist. Locked, immobilized. The crowd froze. The shorter man stared. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Yo, what the? He stepped forward, not to help his friend, but to save face, to prove he wasn't afraid. Sienna didn't let go of the first man, didn't need to, she just looked at the second one. And in that look he saw the same thing his friend had missed. This wasn't a fight, this was a lesson, and he wasn't ready for it, but he came anyway, fist raised, no technique, no control, just wild, drunken courage. Sienna waited until he was close. Then she released the first man, sidestepped the punch, and drove her palm into the second man's solar plexus. He folded, gasping, wheezing, trying to breathe. She didn't follow up, didn't need to, he was done. And so was his friend, who was still on the ground, groaning, trying to figure out what had just happened. The older man in the marine shirt stood up. He wasn't smiling, but there was respect in his eyes, the kind that doesn't need words. Sienna straightened, adjusted her sunglasses, and turned to Theo. You okay? He nodded, wide-eyed, speechless. She reached down, picked up the smoothies, handed him his. And just like that, the fight was over. Not because she'd won, but because she'd never lost. Have you ever seen someone choose mercy when they had every right to choose vengeance? The 2 men were still on the ground when the crowd began to gather closer. Not to help them, but to see her, to understand what had just happened, because what they'd witnessed wasn't violence. It was precision, control, something most people only see in movies. Sienna didn't acknowledge the stares. She knelt beside Theo, one hand still holding her smoothie, the other resting lightly on his shoulder. You scared? He nodded. That's okay, she said softly. Fear means you're paying attention, but you're safe, I promise. He looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time he saw something beyond the mom who made his lunch and reminded him to do his homework. He saw the person she'd been before him. The person she still was when it mattered. One of the men groaned, tried to sit up. Sienna stood, turned, looked down at him. He froze, not because she said anything, but because the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. You don't know who I am, she said quietly, and that's the only reason you're still conscious. The man swallowed hard. His bravado was gone, replaced by something raw, something honest, fear. The shorter one tried to speak. We didn't, she cut him off. You put your hands on my son, then you put them on me in front of witnesses, in broad daylight, because you thought I was just a mom who wouldn't fight back. She crouched down. I level with him now. You were right, I'm a mom, but that's not all I am. The Marine veteran stepped forward. He didn't get too close, just close enough to be seen, to be acknowledged. Ma'am, he said quietly, you need anything? She glanced at him, saw the shirt, saw the scars on his forearms, the way he stood. She knew no, she said, but thank you. He nodded, stayed where he was, just in case. Sienna stood again, looked at the 2 men, then at the crowd, then at her son. I'm not pressing charges, she said. Not to the men, to everyone, because if I do, they'll spend a night in a cell and learn nothing. But if I let them walk away, they'll remember this moment every time they think about putting their hands on someone they don't know. She looked back down at them. You're going to sit here. You're going to wait for the police. You're going to tell them exactly what happened, and you're going to apologize, not to me, to my son. The taller one's voice cracked. We're sorry. Not to me, Sienna repeated. To him. He turned. Looked at Theo. Kid, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. Theo stepped forward, just one step, but it was enough. His voice was small, but it was steady. You shouldn't put your hands on people. The man nodded. You're right. Sienna placed a hand on Theo's shoulder, guided him back. That's enough. The police will be here soon. You'll wait. They nodded, defeated, humiliated, but alive. And that was the point. Because Sienna Maddox didn't need to prove she could hurt people. She'd proven that 100 times over in deserts and mountains and places most people would never know about. What she needed to prove to her son, to herself, was that power without control was just chaos. And she was many things, but chaotic wasn't one of them. The Marine stepped closer, offered his hand. Semper Fi, he said quietly. She shook it. Once, firm. Hora, he smiled, faint. Just a ghost of recognition between two people who'd walked similar paths. You handled that perfectly, he said. She didn't smile back. I handled it the only way I could. With my son watching, he understood, nodded, stepped back, and the plaza slowly began to breathe again. What do you tell your child after they've seen you do something they'll never forget? The police cruiser pulled in with its lights flashing but no siren, tires crunching slowly over the plaza's red brick loop. It wasn't called by Sienna nor by any member of the crowd. Just a clerk from the neighboring pharmacy who had seen the shove, heard the slap, and decided to call it in without waiting to see how it ended. Two officers stepped out. Standard suburban precinct blues, not military. One male, one female, alert but not aggressive. Their eyes scanned the area, first toward the two men still sitting on the curb, then toward Sienna standing calmly beside her son who hadn't let go of the smoothie. What happened here? The male officer asked. Sienna didn't answer first. It was the man in the Marine shirt. Ma'am de-escalated a situation, he said, gesturing toward the downed pair. These two made contact with her son. She stepped in. They escalated. She responded precisely. The female officer looked from him to Sienna. You're the one who was struck. Sienna gave a single nod. Any injuries? No. The taller man on the ground grunted. She threw me on concrete. The Marine laughed softly. No, son, you threw yourself. She just let gravity finish the job. The officers approached Sienna and Theo. Ma'am, we'll need your name for the record, the female officer said gently. Witnesses already said you didn't provoke anything, but Sienna produced her ID without a word. Handed it over, the officer glanced down, her eyebrows lifted slightly. Lieutenant Commander, she asked, retired, active Special Operations Group, local resident, on base. The other officer blinked. Your Navy SEAL? Sienna nodded once. Former. They both looked at each other, then back at the men on the curb. The wiry one tried to speak. She didn't say that up front. Shouldn't have needed to, the Marine muttered behind them. The officers moved methodically now. Statements were taken. Several bystanders stepped forward, offering brief but unified summaries of what had happened. No exaggeration, just facts. She warned them, gave them chances. They touched her son first. She didn't start it. One woman handed over a video file already airdropped to her phone. The male officer turned back toward Sienna as the scene settled. Do you wish to press charges? Sienna looked down at Theo. His eyes had steadied. The earlier fear replaced by something deeper, understanding. She looked back at the officer. No, she said, I don't need them charged. I need them to remember. The officers paused. Then the female one said, understood. Theo tugged at his mother's shirt. Why not? She knelt for the first time all afternoon, one knee on the pavement, eyes level with her son. Because if they ever try this again, she said softly, with someone who can't stop them, there won't be a lesson left to learn. Theo nodded slowly. She stood again, tall, composed, untouched. The taller man looked up at her now. Not angry, not defensive, just aware. For the first time that day, he seemed to recognize who he'd been speaking to. The Marine approached quietly and offered Sienna a folded slip of paper. What's this? She asked. Local Veteran Resource Council, he said. We do community outreach. If you ever want to speak at the school or mentor, we'd be proud to have you. She accepted it with a nod. I'll think about it. The officers walked the two men over to the cruiser. Not in cuffs, but with a silence that didn't need steel to feel like consequence. As they pulled away, the small crowd fully dispersed, and the plaza returned to its normal hum. Only now it carried a different tone, quieter, more alert, because they'd just seen something rare, not force, not revenge, control. And control, they realized, was the rarest power of all. When your child looks at you differently, do you explain who you were or show them who you are? The plaza had mostly emptied by the time Sienna and Theo began walking again. No one stopped them. No one asked questions. And yet every passerby offered a subtle nod. One of those rare acknowledgments between strangers who had just witnessed something they didn't quite have the words for. Theo stayed close at her side, holding his smoothie in one hand, soccer ball tucked under the other arm. His walk was slower now. Not tired, not scared, just thoughtful. They didn't talk at first. Sienna didn't feel the silence. She never had. She walked the way she fought, measured, alert, present. Theo finally broke the quiet. "Why didn't you tell me before?" She didn't ask what he meant. She knew. "That I was a SEAL," she asked. He nodded. "Or that you could do all that. The fighting, the calm, everything." She gave a faint smile without looking down. "Because it's not who I am all the time. It's just what I've trained to do when it's necessary." "But that guy hit you." "I've been hit before," she said. "Didn't it make you mad?" Sienna took a breath, then answered carefully. "It made me alert. That's not the same as angry." Theo looked down. I thought you'd hit him back right away." "I could have," she said. "But then he wouldn't have learned anything, and neither would you." Theo looked up at her, his eyes clearer than they'd been all day. "You weren't trying to win." "No," she said. "I was trying to show you what not to become." They walked past the empty bench where the smoothies had first been set down. The sun had dipped behind the far roofline now, casting long shadows down the side of the strip. Sienna adjusted her pace so Theo stayed just ahead, subtly watching the way he carried himself. He didn't look shaken. He looked older. They reached the car and Sienna unlocked it with a chirp of the fob. She opened the back door for him, waited as he slid in, then handed him the last of the napkins from her pocket. He wiped his hands, then leaned forward as she closed the door. Before she got in the driver's seat, he spoke again. "Are you going to tell anyone?" She paused with one hand on the door handle. "No," she said, "but I think they already did." The smile that crossed his face wasn't wide, but it was the kind that lasted. Because for the first time in his life, he understood something most kids don't until much later. His mother wasn't just the one who packed his lunches, signed his permission slips, and told him to wear his helmet. She was someone people underestimated once, and never again. Sienna slid into the driver's seat, checked the mirror, started the engine. As they pulled out of the plaza, the last thing she saw was the man in the marine shirt still standing outside the bakery, watching them leave. He didn't wave, but he nodded once. So did she. And then she drove on. Because the afternoon had started with a simple errand, a routine trip, a mother and son walking through a parking lot, but it had ended with something else. A lesson, not in violence, not in revenge, but in restraint, in dignity, in the kind of strength that doesn't need to announce itself because it simply is. Theo stared out the window as they drove. His reflection in the glass looked different now, not because he'd changed, but because he'd seen something real. Something most people go their whole lives without seeing. The difference between reacting and responding, between anger and control, between winning a fight and teaching a lesson. And as the car turned onto the main road, as the plaza disappeared behind them, Sienna glanced in the rearview mirror at her son. He was quiet, thoughtful, processing. And she knew in that moment that he would carry this with him, not as trauma, but as understanding. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And when it does, the world doesn't forget.